Okay, so welcome to this twin session, and we're going to look at a sutta that looks at the nutriment for both the hindrances and the practice of awakening. So before we do that, let's just start off with remembering the attributes of the Buddha. So Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So today we're going to look at Samyutta Nikaya 46.2, and this is a short sutta which is often incorporated in a 10-day meditation retreat. And it's very helpful and very useful because it immediately begins to relate to the aspects of our practice which will take us away from progress and those that will be, if you like, developed as a consequence of progress. And progress here is, if you like, described, if you like, by the stages of development, which Bhante described or used that description for the jhanas. And these are stages of understanding. And the hindrances are not present in the jhanas. That's kind of what defines the jhanas. But also, if they are developed, they take us out of the practice. And when we develop the jhanas, what we find is that we also, as a consequence of that, develop the practice of awakening. So let's just start. At Savatthi, bhikkhus, just as this body, sustained by nutriment, subsists independent on nutriment, and does not subsist without nutriment, so too the 5 hindrances, sustained by nutriment, subsist independent on nutriment, and do not subsist without nutriment. So I think this was a very useful opening paragraph because it immediately relates to something which is common in our daily life, and that is that if we eat and if we drink, our body is sustained, and if we don't do either of those, then the body begins to decline. And so we see straight away with this analogy that the hindrances are, if you like, under our control. We can choose to feed them or we can choose not to feed them. And this is a very helpful recognition. And the hindrances are, if you like, our attachment and our aversion to sensory input. They're things like sloth and torpor. So that resistance in the mind to apply our practice and sustain that, skeptical doubt about the veracity or the helpfulness of the practice, and things like restlessness and anxiety. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire? So here's attachment or greed. Attachment to the input coming in, the way we interface with the outer world and the way we interface with the inner world. So in Buddhist doctrine, what we have are the 5 external senses: the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the touch of the body. And we have the inward facing sense, which is the mind. So here we're talking about this attachment to these outward-facing senses and the inward mind. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire? There is bhikkhus the sign of the beautiful. Okay, so we can think of the sign of the beautiful in a sort of very everyday way, as something that is very attractive, something that draws our attention. But what's very useful here is to recognize what the Pali word for the beautiful here Now, the Pali word for the beautiful is Subha. And we don't often come across this, but we do come across Asubha. And Asubha is, if we look at the Sallekhasutta, there's a section here which is contemplation of foulness. And foulness are Asubha practices. So we think of what would constitute something that would bring that reaction to us. We can see very clearly the aversion to that experience. And then if we think of the Subha, so the things which are the opposite to what we would consider Asubha, we immediately begin perhaps to connect to the way the mind would go outward towards these things. So sometimes the beautiful isn't always a helpful translation here, because the things that we find Subha aren't necessarily what we might consider aesthetically beautiful, but they are the things that draw our mind outward. The mind searches for them or engages with them. So when we work this way, the sign of the beautiful is the things that draw our mind out. And so we engage with this outward referencing. But of course, it can be an inward drawing out, something which is pleasant in our meditation experience. So one of the things that we also need to be aware of is attachment to, if you like, the beautiful within the practice. And we notice that becomes a hindrance when we've had a good sit, we want to repeat it. And that simple wanting to repeat it almost guarantees that we have a completely different sit, often with restlessness or irritation or disappointment. So there is, because the sign of the beautiful, frequently giving careless attention to this. And careless attention is this non-collectedness. So we're looking for this collectedness, samadhi, which is, if you like, a soft holding of the experience. But if we get drawn out and get embroiled and caught up with this experience, then we can begin to see that we're no longer maintaining that awareness of what is going on. We're immersed in what's going on. So frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire, and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire. So there we have the first two steps of what we might call wrong effort. And we counterbalance that using the 6 R's. The 6 R's, first of all, is recognizing that something has arisen that's not helpful for our practice, and that we could use a catch-all phrase of something unwholesome, and we have to be careful here not to have a moralistic judgment around the unwholesome. The unwholesome simply means something here in this context that's taken us away from our practice, and so recognizing that's happened, something has arisen in the senses that's taken us away from the practice, is the first step of the 6 R's. Releasing away from that, turning our attention back towards the object of our contemplation, or maybe it's something we're doing in work in daily life, and then relaxing the tension inside our head around our brain. That is what releases the nutriment that is fueling this. So the first 3 steps of the 6 R's are dealing with this careless attention, the arising of something unrisen, and the increase and expansion of it, because we fuel it, and we fuel it with craving. And so the release of tension around our brain is like beginning to turn the tap off, removing the fuel or the nutriment to what's going on. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen ill will, and for the increase and expansion of arisen ill will. So here we have, aversion, if you like. We have greed and we have aversion, the ill will here. There is because the sign of the repulsive. Okay, now the repulsive here we might expect in this context to be Asubha, but it's not. It's a different Pali word, and it has this feeling of energetic aversion. Frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen ill will, and for the increase and expansion of the arisen ill will. So we're giving it our attention. And by giving it that attention, we give it energy. So again, the first 3 steps of the 6 R's are what are allowing us, if you like, to begin to turn the tap of that fueling off. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor, and for the increase and expansion of arisen sloth and torpor. There are bhikkhus discontent, lethargy, lazy stretching, drowsiness after meals, sluggishness of mind. So I think we can all recognize aspects of that in our practice. And one of the things that counteract sloth and torpor is interest, taking an interest in what's going on. And the first interest that we need to take is the fact that an interest in the fact that sloth and torpor's here in the first place. This is here. That's interesting. Because just being interested in the fact that it's arisen, rather than being annoyed and disappointed or dissatisfied that state of mind, that torpid state of mind, that sort of the mind full of cotton wool or resistance. If we just allow ourselves to pay attention to that, then we're going to fuel it. But if we can pay attention to and interest into why has this occurred, then the mind begins to move into a different state. Frequently giving careless attention to them is the nutriment, the arising of unarisen sloth and torpor, and for the increase and expansion in the arisen sloth and torpor. So the interest is recognizing they're there, and that is the first step of the 6 R's. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse, and for the increase and expansion of arisen restlessness and remorse. There is bhikkhus unsettledness of mind. Now, mind here is a translation of chittaso, and chittaso has the root of the chitta. So the chitta is the heart mind, as opposed to mano, if you like, which mano might be the intellectual mind. So chitta is the heart mind. So here is the root of the emotions, and the emotions give us this restlessness and remorse. It's a different aspect of mind, if you like. Frequently giving careless attention to it is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen restlessness and remorse, and for the increase and expansion of arisen restlessness and remorse. So one of the things that we can do with a restless mind is choose to allow the mind to settle. So we might do that by coming back into the feeling of contact with the ground, or depending on the type of meditation we're doing, we might come into our breath. We might choose simply with restlessness and remorse. We'll often notice that our body is tense and relaxing that body. That in itself connects us to the parasympathetic nervous system of the body, which is a rest and digest response. So these simple things, lengthening the breath out, will help settle the mind. Coming into our body rather than it being in our thoughts. So coming back into the somatic experience, the experience of the felt experience of the body, helps us come out of this agitation that's in the mind. And we might only need to do that for a breath, just to reconnect and come back. And then we might notice also, for instance, that when we do that, we recognize perhaps the thoughts and patterns are coming on, and then we can six off. And we six off the thoughts and then back to our meditation. And what Bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen doubt and for the increase and expansion of arisen doubt. There are bhikkhus, things that are the basis for doubt. Frequently giving careless attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen doubt and for the increase and expansion of arisen doubt. So, doubt in our practice, often it's associated with not knowing if we're doing it correctly, or whether we're applying the instructions in the right way, or whether we can trust the experience that we're having. And one of the things that we need to remember when we're practicing is that the invitation from Bhante Vimoramsi is simply to observe. And so if we see these doubts coming up, we allow ourselves to recognize that this is present. And it's a little bit like some of the other hindrances. If we can just create that little bit of stepping back from the experience so that we can adopt the observing perspective, then what we find is that we can, if you like, get a better handle on what's going on. So rather than being lost in doubt and the worry that may be creating, we can step back and recognize the process of doubt is there. It's a process of doubt. And when we can recognize again, the somatic symptoms of that, there may be a holding or bracing in the body, which comes with the frustration or the sense of not knowing, and we can soften around that, because all of these things are fueled by this careless attention. By taking an interest in the doubt, we begin to then recognize that it's coming up, not because there's some sense of truth behind it, but because it's a process of mental activity. So we need to allow ourselves the capacity to see it's there and to let it go. So the process of seeing it's there is the recognizing that it's arisen. Then we release away from it, turn towards the meditation object, but recognizing the tension that may exist around our mind or around our brain. Relax that tension, relax any tension in the body, because so many of the hindrances will have a somatic response in the body. So a somatic is again that felt experience. Soften around that. And then the second half of the 6 arts. So that's the coming back into balance. And then the retraining of the mind is to smile and come back to the object of attention and expect to repeat that numerous times. And that's the retraining of the mind that comes with the 6 R's. Just as this body, bhikkhus, sustained by nutriment, subsists in dependence on nutriment, and does not subsist without nutriment, so too the 5 hindrances, sustained by nutriment, subsist in dependence on nutriment, and do not subsist without nutriment. So, again, coming back to this image of feeding the hindrances, turning on the tap of the fuel or turning the tap off. And the 6 R's are part of the process of this turning the tap off and coming back. Now, what's important to recognize is that the hindrances are not bad. The hindrances are a natural occurrence. They can occur spontaneously in our practice. And one of the great strengths of what Bhante Brahmaramsi teaches is that the hindrances can be our friends. And they're our friends because they reveal where our attachment and aversions are, where our holding on to experiences are, where our pushing away of experiences are. And this is what we need to see. We need to see this very clearly, because this is what's going to help us in daily life. If we can begin to become sensitive to seeing the hindrances as they arise, then this shows us the path we need to take in our practice. So the hindrances aren't a problem. There's something to be understood. And in the understanding, then they begin to fade away, because in the understanding, we're learning what they're there to teach us. And so Bhante Brahmaramsi would often say, don't worry if in half an hour or an hour sit, you have to 6R 40, 50, 60, 70 times. He said, that's not a bad meditation, it's just an active meditation. Because if you're 6Ring that amount, and you're seeing what's going on, and you're building a relationship to the hindrances, which are fundamentally different to what we've done in the past. We don't, in our past way of being, we haven't related to the hindrances at all. But if we're now applying the 6 R's, of bringing the mind back into balance and then retraining it, and the retraining it is, if you like, building a new neural pathway response to the hindrances. Instead of going down the same old track that we've done in the past, we're actually building a different response. So the same old track could be considered like a reaction. We always reacted in the same way. And now we're learning to respond rather than react, because we're making a conscious choice about our relationship to the hindrance. And that conscious choice is expressed through applying the 6 R's. So the hindrances, although they keep us out of the jhanas, and although they are what disrupt our practice, they are a symptom rather than a cause. They are an expression of our attachment and aversion. So it's our attachment and aversion that is the cause, and the hindrances come up. So then you can see that they're a flag waving at us to get a handle on our attachment and aversions. And so they're useful in our practice. And then we move into the second section of this sutta. And here it's talking about the nutriments for the enlightenment factors, or the factors of awakening. Bhikkhus, just as this body, sustained by nutriment, subsists in dependence on nutriment, and does not subsist without nutriment, so too the 7 factors of enlightenment, sustained by nutriment, subsist in dependence on nutriment, and do not subsist without nutriment. So here we have the same introduction as the hindrances. We can choose to feed the factors of awakening, or we can choose not to. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness, for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness. There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for enlightenment, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Now, what are these things? Well, they can be multifarious, and we have, the 37, categories of things which are factors of enlightenment, and that's a whole other area of study. But I'm also interested here that there's something very simple that we can do to encourage this mindfulness, to encourage it in awareness. And in fact, it's in a sutta that's just over the page. And I'm just going to just read this little extract from the 46.2. So, having been in contact with the Dharma, the teaching, and in this little extract, it's in the context of some bhikkhus who have been listening to senior bhikkhus expounding the Dharma. Because when one has heard the Dharma from such bhikkhus, one dwells withdrawn by the way of 2 kinds of withdrawal of body and withdrawal of mind. Dwelling thus withdrawn, one recollects the Dharma and thinks it over. Whenever a bhikkhu dwells thus, withdrawn, recollects that Dharma and thinks it over, on that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness is aroused by the bhikkhu. On that occasion, the bhikkhu develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. On that occasion, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness comes to fulfillment by development in the bhikkhu. So what have we got here? We've got this just reflection on the teaching. Okay, now, in a monastic environment, withdrawing of body and withdrawing of mind, is part of the practice. So what is it for us as laity? Well, it's when we choose to sit down and do our formal practice. This is when we're choosing to withdraw mind and withdraw body. And so if we find that our mindfulness is not as available as we would like, we need to, in this passage, recollect on the teaching that's been given. Just reflect on what we've learned from sessions such as this, and the teachings from Sister Kima and Auntie Dhammakavesi about practice. So that very simple approach of reflecting on Dharma can be enough to bring back the mindfulness that we need to apply. And what because is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of discrimination of states. Now, discrimination of states is this investigative mind that's seeing what's going on and seeing clearly. And for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of the discrimination of states. There are bhikkhus wholesome and unwholesome states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. Okay, so if we look at Majjhima Nikaya 8, I think it is, we get a whole list. There's 40, 50, 60 different states and their counterparts. And what we look at there when we look at that sutta is that we're looking at a way of working with these states by I think the sutta is called Effacement. And Effacement is basically drawing up the opposite. So if we are working with cruelty, the counterpart of that would be non-cruelty. And we have to make the effort to move in that direction. So we have to incline our mind, so that Matanakkara invites us to do. We need to lean our mind in and have the intention to develop the opposite state. And so we might think of this in terms of the 5 precepts. The 5 precepts here are, the invitation in the mind not to cause harm or to kill. But we need to make the effort, incline our mind not to do that, or not to take what is not given. We can simply say the words, but actually we need to incline our mind and have the intention not to do, or to misuse sexuality, say, or not to indulge in gossip, backbiting, lying, slander, all of these things. But we have to make the effort to incline the mind, or not to take substances which interfere with the clarity of the mind. So typically they're called, embraces drink and drugs, but there could be anything. If you have a particular strong cup of coffee before you meditate, you may find your mind is very fuzzy in a way which is not conducive to the meditation. So these states, wholesome and unwholesome, all of these states and their counterparts. What's very important here is that we're working with this inclining the mind, this intention to develop a counterpart to the unwholesome, and so cultivate wholesome. And so one of the ways we do that again is through the 6 R's. 6 R's is recognizing that the unwholesome has arisen and substituting the wholesome. And coming back to the practice. So if we give frequent attention, careful attention to them, let me just go back in. There are, because wholesome and unwholesome states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen factor of discrimination of states. So, seeing these states arise, seeing their counterpart. This investigation of this process is the discrimination of states. And for the fulfillment by the development of the unarisen enlightenment factor of the discrimination of states. And what, because, is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of energy, and for the fulfillment by the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of energy. There are, because, the element of arousal, the element of endeavor, and the element of exertion. And the way to think of these is, if you like, that the arousal of energy is that initial impetus, if you like, and then the element of endeavor is when we have got that initial arousal, we're then developing the energy. And then the element of exertion is described as when full energy is present. So we can see this process of developing the energy. And this is, if you like, our application. So we've taken an interest, we're seeing what's going on, we've used the 6 R's to come back to our meditation object, and now we're looking to sustain the energy of attention here. Frequently giving careful attention to these is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of energy. And remember, energy is the counterpose to sloth and torpor. Yeah. And for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of energy. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen factor of joy, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen factor, enlightenment factor of joy. Okay, I've just got another reference here. Let me just find that. Okay. There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of joy. And I'm just moving over to Sutta 47.10 in the same volume, book 5, Samyutta Nikaya. And okay. So this little extract is about a bhikkhu who's in the middle of his mindfulness contemplation. While he is contemplating the body as the body, there arises in him, based on the body, either a fever in the body or a sluggishness of mind, or the mind is distracted outwardly. That bhikkhu should then direct his mind towards some inspiring sign. When he directs his mind towards some inspiring sign, gladness is born. When he is gladdened, joy is born. And when the mind is uplifted by joy, the body becomes tranquil. So here we begin to see the stages of aspects of the jhanas. So here's the sluggish of mind, and the enlightenment factor of joy is developed by directing the mind towards some inspiring sign. Okay, so inspiration, what is for you as an individual something which would inspire you to come back into the practice and develop this aspect of joyfulness? And what's interesting in this reference is that the sequence here isn't one that's deliberately laid out. It's one that evolves naturally. So the stages here, once you direct your mind towards the inspiring, a gladness comes up. And with that gladness comes the joy. And with the joy, then comes the tranquility. And with the tranquility, then comes the contentedness, the sukha. So this is just like the progression through the jhanas. There's a natural consequence of the practice that brings the mind through. So something that's inspiring. So we might recollect some aspect of the teaching, some aspect of the benefit that we've experienced from the practice, anything which actually then lifts the mind and starts this process off. So frequently giving careful attention to things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of joy. So inspiration is an example from another sutta. Giving careful attention to the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of joy. and for the fulfillment by the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of joy. Another aspect which Silasutta often quotes that brings joy to the practice is having the basis of dana, generosity, having generosity as an aspect of our lives. And so she will often describe the triplet dana, sila, bhavana. And dana is generosity. Sila is, if you like, keeping the precepts. And remember that Sister Kima often describes keeping the precepts as an umbrella to protect us from the hindrances. And then bhavana is development. Development of mind, development, if you like, in how we behave, a behavioral development, a development in the body. So part of the development in the body, for instance, is the fact that the body begins to disappear as we go through different stages of understanding of the jhanas. And what because is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of tranquility, and for the fulfillment by the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of tranquility. There are because tranquility of body, tranquility of mind. So what's really important here is to recognize that the mind and body are interrelated. So remember from the Sallekhasutta, we go through with the body the first stage of the four Sallekhasuttas, and what we develop there is an awareness of in-breath, out-breath. When we breathe in, we know we're breathing in. When we breathe out, we know we're breathing out. When we breathe in long, we know we breathe in long. When we breathe out long, we know we breathe out long. When we breathe in short, we know we're breathing in short. When we breathe out short, we know we're breathing out short. So this is an awareness of the breath. It's not a manipulation of the breath. It's simply understanding what's going on. And then it says, breathing in, we tranquilize the bodily formation. So this isn't an observation, this is an action. So what is tranquilizing the bodily formation? It's this releasing tension. Pancha talks about it. And if we look at the Anapanasati Sutta, we also have the invitation to tranquilize the mental formation. And so this is the releasing the tension around our physical brain. The physical brain is part of our physical body, so it's incorporated in the Sadhana description. But then we're talking specifically in the Anapanasati Sutta about the mental formation, so the tension that's created by our mental formations. So when we're doing this, there are because tranquility of body, tranquility of mind. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of tranquility. So we can begin to see here this progression from the joy to the tranquility, is part of the practice. And if tranquilizing the body and tranquilizing the mind is the mechanism for developing tranquility, well, we can see that the stages of the 6 R's are what are allowing us to move through this process. So the 6 R's, right effort, are a fundamental factor in developing our capacity to develop mentally. And that's the bhavana. So we've got the dana, the sila, and the bhavana. Generosity, bringing around the rapture, so if you like, starting a similar process. the sila protecting us from the hindrances, and then this development of mind, development of body, development of behavior coming through as a consequence of these supporting factors. And what because it is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of concentration. So here, this is samadhi. And Bhante Virahamsa often says that concentration is not a helpful term here. And he much prefers the word of collectedness of mind. And for the fulfillment by the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of this collectedness. There are bhikkhus the sign of serenity, the sign of non-dispersal. So, dispersal, this, if you think of the mind being dispersed, you know, it's not going to be have this collected quality. So one of the things that we do in the practice is when we notice the mind is dispersed, we with the 6 arts we allow it to come back into this collective nature, and as we do that, we notice that the mind is becoming more collected, less distracted, not because we're trying to hold it in place, but because we're releasing away from the things that create this dispersal. So it's not that we're holding the mind still, we're taking away the factors which encourage it to be non-still. So then we develop this enlightenment factor or the sign of serenity and non-dispersal. Frequently giving careful attention to these factors. Let me say, there are bhikkhus the sign of serenity, the sign of non-dispersal. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of collectedness, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of collectedness. So this serenity, this non-dispersal. And often when we're moving through the jhanas, we can see the mind perhaps getting a little bored. And it gets bored with this sense of serenity. It wants to see something. It wants to engage. And this wanting to see and engagement is an aspect of dispersal. And, you know, softly releasing away from that, coming back, maintaining the observer perspective of just seeing what's going on, rather than trying to generate something to see. So nothingness is an example of this, where we can be in a state of nothingness and simply observing that nothingness is there. And after a little while, the mind starts to cast around to see what nothingness is, rather than to accept that nothingness is nothingness. And what bhikkhus is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of equanimity, and for the fulfillment by the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity. There are bhikkhus things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of equanimity. Frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factors of equanimity, and for the fulfillment by the development of the arisen enlightenment factor of equanimity. So what is equanimity here? It's the balanced mind. And so we notice as we move into fourth jhana, equanimity becomes much more dominant. And in fact, the other jhanas, which sometimes are called 5, 6, 7, and 8, are actually refinements of jhana 4. They are refinements of equanimity. And so when we look at the factors or the things that encourage us to gradually move through these refinements of equanimity, then what we notice here is that it's a not holding on to what was present in the less refined form of equanimity. So, for instance, in infinite space, we can feel this sense of the loving kindness emanating outward, and it can feel a very dynamic state. But if we hold on to that as the expression, we're not going to develop the more refined aspects of equanimity. Again, we need to allow ourselves simply to observe, so that this expansive form of the loving kindness then begins to contract and change. And it begins to change into compassion. But if we hold on to the previous expression of equanimity, which was this expansiveness, then we're not going to move through the various stages of refinement of equanimity. And so, again, it's this observer perspective, which is very helpful at this stage. Simply allowing the mind to change and observe the changes it comes through, not holding on to experience. Just as this body, bhikkhus, sustained by nutriment, subsists in dependence on nutriment, and does not subsist without nutriment, so too these 7 factors of enlightenment, sustained by nutriment, subsist in dependence on nutriment, and do not subsist without nutriment. And that's the end of the sutta. So what I like about these suttas is they're really quite, they're very helpful in relating to not only daily practice, but also daily life. And just asking ourselves, how did I feed what I last experienced? Whether it's a hindrance or an enlightenment factor. What did I do that enabled that to happen? And when we invite that inquiry, we also invite an inquiry into dependent origination, into seeing the links of cognition that occurred. You know, my mind was like that, this arose, and that happened. And that can be a factor of enlightenment arising. It can also be a hindrance arising. And then we can ask ourselves, what happened when that disappeared? What was it that I did? So in a hindrance, it might have been recognizing it was there, 6Ring, releasing the craving that the hindrance had created and coming back. For an enlightenment factor, it might have been that we started to pay attention to something else. And by directing our attention over here, this enlightenment factor then faded out. And so we begin to see how we make choices about what we feed and what we don't feed. And if you like, the good news there is that it is a choice about what we feed. It's not that we weren't or didn't have that choice. And we might not make skillful choices all the time or most of the time. But as we begin to see it, we also begin to learn more. So, any questions? One of the things that might be a useful thing to do just for this moment is just reflect on what we've just heard. So perhaps if we just do a a few minutes. So just sit comfortably. Softly rotate your inner thighs towards the center, and you'll notice that that will help you relax out your hips and open up your lower back. And then if you drop the inner edge of your shoulder blades, bits closest to your spine, just enough, you may notice there's space created around your heart. Gently smile. Allow your body to come into balance. And when you allow your body to come into balance, you invite your mind to follow. Bring your attention to the contact with either the ground or the seat of your chair. Take a deliberate breath in. And then softly open your eyes. Okay. Is there anything anyone would like to ask about the content of Sutta? Yes, May.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. If we want to summarize this sutta like in a very compact way, is it sufficient to say that the way to counteract the arising of hindrances is just practice the 6 R's, well, at least the first part, and the way to maintain the arisen enlightenment factors is to continue with the second half of the 6 R's. That is the smiling, and then the whatever we is our object of meditation, whether it's loving kindness or yeah, or the task that we're doing.
Yeah, I think there's a way that you can look at the 6 R's as coming out of the hindrances and re-establishing the conducive environment for the factors of enlightenment. But then I think the factors of enlightenment are something that you cultivate. So it's a leaning of the mind. Yeah, and one of the aspects of being in jhana is that I think the enlightenment factors are being cultivated and strengthened through being in the jhana, because the hindrances are not present. That's a very simple way of defining jhana, is the absence of the hindrances. Yeah. So thank you for that. And also, if you want to just type in a question, you're welcome to do that as well. Any other questions around the sutta, or other aspects of practice?
Sorry, can I ask another question, Hugh? So just to double check, so the references that you've made earlier was 45.3, 46.3, which is the sutta right after this one.
That's
and then
right.
You also made a reference to 46.10. Is that correct?
Let's find that for you. 47:10.
47:10. And then a reference to Majjhima Nikaya number 8.
That's right. Yep, which is the sutta on effacement, and it's about bringing up the opposite. So again, this is a conscious choice. It's not that the opposite will automatically appear. It's that we have to lean our mind to do that. So this is, if you like, another description of right effort. We have to make the intention to lean our mind in that direction.
Sorry, I have another question, just based on what you just said. Okay. So how different is the Majjhima Nikaya number 8, in brief, compared with the Veda-Vitakka Sutta, which is on the Veda-Vitakka Sutta on the thoughts, the one where, the Buddha was comparing the states of mind if he was in the state of, let's say, an unwholesome state versus a wholesome state. So I'll go and read M&8 later, but I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what would be the difference between these two suttas?
I'm just trying to remember the Vitakka Sutta. This is the two kinds of thoughts. Sutta, yeah. I don't have that in front of me right now, but what I would say about the Majjhima Nikaya 8 is that what's very clear about that is that the effort needs to be made to bring up the opposite, the counterpart, as they call it. And it's so if we notice, for instance, the energy would have if we had an absence of energy, the counterpart of that is the laziness. So if we notice the laziness, we need to make the effort to create the energy. We have to lean our mind towards that. If there's cruelty, we need to make the effort to develop non-cruelty. And one aspect of non-cruelty would be compassion. If there's ill will, we would have to make the effort to create non-ill will, which would be the loving kindness. So it's part of this is the investigation of states, is to see that this is present. And with the unfortunately, I don't have the Majjhima Nikaya with me, so I'm not able to quickly have a look at the detail of what he said in the two kinds of thought. But I can have a look at that another time and come back to you about that.
Yeah, that's okay, Hugh. It's just curious. But I guess it's still probably just another way of explaining how to practice. It's like probably two different ways of saying the same thing, I'm guessing.
Well, yes. I mean, the effacement one is very much seeing clearly what's present now and recognizing that I need to do something different. Yeah. And the thing that comes across in the Majjhima 8 are the stages of actually doing that, and the sutta describes that. And one of the key stages is this leaning our mind towards it. So we have to make this conscious effort, intention, chaitana. And chaitana is the most important part of the sankharas. It's the most influential aspect of the sankharas. And the sankharas are, if you like, the mental formations. And that includes everything. That includes the hindrances, it includes loving kindness, it includes compassion, it includes our beliefs, our thoughts, our habitual reactions. All of these are mental factors. But chaitana is at the top of the list. Intention is key. And how do we, what is the intention behind the movement of mind, if you like? And so this is a very important aspect. Oh, I have a question here from Sarah, who's off screen.
Actually, it's not so much a question, but listening to your discussion there with May, what came through for me is the bringing out into very sharp relief the opposites, which is what you're describing through intention. And it just very neatly encapsulates about nutriment and how you feed your mind leads to opposite experiences. So it felt like it's describing the big picture. Feed your mind this way and you end up in a very unwholesome state of mind. And then there were the various examples of that. Feed your mind in the other direction and you end up with wholesome states of mind. So it's giving us a very big picture here to understand that the intention is really key and the way we feed our mind is really key, and then consequences happen. So up to us which way we go, and the teaching gives us a very in other places it starts to describe how we do the feeding, and I think you brought that out really well with the feeding that comes through naturally in the jhanas is the state of enlightenment, but also there's something that we can lean into, and then the hindrances are friendly allies in that when they arise, they show us where our deep-seated attachments and aversions are, so that we can then kind of marry that all together and work with our intention and try and align with the feeding that's going to be wholesome and sustaining. Yeah,
because I think one of the things about the hindrances arising is they're a friend because they're a flag waving at us, and the flag's simply saying, "You're feeding us. That's why I'm here." And so, one of the things we need to do is go, what happened there? We need that investigation of states. And we can do that in daily life. It's not just a deep meditation experience. We can investigate what happened there. And if we catch it early enough, we'll have enough memory to see the stages of what occurred. Oh, I felt this way. This feeling arose. I was uncomfortable. I didn't like it. I blamed this individual for it arising. So then I said this or did that or thought this. And we'll see it laid out. And we'll see those states laid out. And we'll see just how we fed it. And then there'll be other times when something's happened and we'll notice we didn't react. And the mind will go, shouldn't I be reacting to this? And then we can go back and look at it and go, that didn't occur. I didn't take it personally. And because I didn't take it personally, none of this was fed. And so just in daily life, we can begin to see how the hindrances arise, how the factors of enlightenment or awakening arise in our daily life. They're not just states to investigate in meditation. The sitting meditation is where we practice. This is where we practice with these states. And we encourage them, if you like, to reveal themselves, because we're not moving, we're trying to keep our mind on a constructive, wholesome state, which is the loving kindness or awareness of the breath, and we're interested in how do we get pulled away from that. And as we do that, then we begin to see what's going on, and we practice with it. But then, having practiced, we take it into daily life, because that's where we apply what we've learned. Sarah, there.
Could you say something a little more about the nature of somatic tension and the hindrances in daily life? Because you touched on that in the talk, and I think that's an interesting area to bring out. How does the somatic tension, an awareness, a sensitivity of that, help us recognize we're actually dealing with some hindrances that have come up, and how do we then rebalance?
Okay, so this is an interesting thing. The somatic experience relating to hindrances and relating to the factors of awakening. Well, basically, the hindrances will create a physical tension in your body, and that will occur in different places for different people. So there can be certain generalizations, perhaps upper body, around the heart, the throat, lower back, but it could be anywhere else. I've certainly had clients where their tension appeared in the calves of the lower legs. So don't necessarily expect this to be prescriptive, but the hindrances essentially create tension, and the factors of enlightenment or awakening remove tension. So the body feels much more fluid, open, relaxed, dynamic, energized with the factors of awakening, and with the hindrances present, the body feels more compressed, tighter, heavier, restricted, more effortful, usually hotter, when the hindrances are present. So we can use these somatic markers, if you like, as ways to recognize something is going on before maybe we've actually got conscious awareness of it happening. And we can notice this in our sitting formal meditation, because we can be sitting there and we can feel tension starting up. And we can perhaps feel tension in the hip or in our lower back, and we can tranquilize the bodily formation and come back into balance. Or we can allow that to manifest as a mental response. Oh, this is getting uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm going to be able to sit here very much longer, and all that, and it manifests. Or it can go the other way around. We can get caught by a distraction, one of the hindrances, and we can begin to spiral off into thought, and then we can begin to see tension arise in our body as that happens. Now, we have a choice here. We can release and relax the experience in the mind, or we can begin to soften around the tension in the body. It's the same thing. We can 6R through the body, we can 6R through the mind, because this tension also is part of the fueling. Because this tension triggers the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. Here's the hindrances. But the sympathetic nervous system has two aspects to it. It has this fight or flight, but it also has an appeasing aspect to it. When we're in an environment where we can't do anything, we can have this appeasing, or this sort of like when a mouse is caught in a really difficult situation and it can't escape, it can play dead, and so we can have that same reaction in ourselves. So these are different aspects of this fight or flight or engagement response that we have to some mental or sensory stimulus. And so we can see this in the body, particularly if we're doing the avoidant part. We can see this in the body perhaps more easily than we can see it in the mind, and we can soften around it and come back into balance. So this tranquility of the mind, tranquility of the body is a really, really useful and integral part of the practice. And I think this is one of the great things that Bhante Brahmaransi has brought to the practice of meditation, is this awareness of tension. Has that? Yeah, okay. Let's answer that. Any other questions? I can see AJ trying to connect to audio here. If you want to ask a question and are having difficulty, please just type it into the chat and then we'll pick it up from there. Okay, May. I don't think we have much else. So, should we do a closing sharing of that?
Yes, that
Have
would
it
be
here.
great.
Okay.
I'll just recite.
Would you like to recite, or would you like me to recite?
I have the text here pulled up, so I can recite it if you like.
Yep.
Okay. May suffering one be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and I look forward to the next time we get a chance to do this.
Thank you so much, Hugh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.